your Portland Trailblazers. It's the off season for them. You know, we've got the NBA finals still going on.
28 other teams.
It certainly is. They made a couple of assistant coaching hires over the weekend.
Yeah, no, I broke the news of Patrick St. Andrews joining the roster overseas. I want to say Eurohoop broke the news of Thiago Splitter joining the Portland Trailblazers roster. And these are two, I think, very, very, very good hires. When I started kind of hearing behind the scenes that Splitter was going to join this weekend, I started kind of diving in and asking around and seeing where I could find out about what other potential hires they may be doing. And Splitter is a guy who I think people will remember him for his playing days with the San Antonio Spurs. He wasn't this like tremendous counting numbers
Brazilian.
Yes. But he was a great role player on those very, very, very good Spurs teams. And I think if you hear Thiago Splitter, you think of Fabrizio Alberto and you know, like those teams. But Splitter's been working as assistant coach now for 4 years, because he's the head coach for Paris basketball. He took the place of Thomas Isolo when he left and came over to the Grizzlies last year. But Splitter is a guy who, when asking around the league, both in Houston and in Brooklyn, talking to people at both places that have worked with him, they think he might be a future head coach in the NBA. The same was true of St. Andrews. Patrick St. Andrews, a lot of people call him Saint. But both those guys, glowing reviews from everybody that I talked to. And Splitter, he took over Paris basketball, and Isolo had them running their offense there, and it was basically the best offense in EuroLeague. It was incredible. There was a little bit of fall off from first to third with Splitter, and the reason Splitter left is because a lot of those players were going to leave the organization. It was like, time to go. And it's also to get easier to get a head coaching job in the NBA if you're already in the NBA. No, don't get me wrong. Like Isolo, like if you're a standalone,
or David Blatt,
you can get those opportunities certainly. But with his team not
as long as LeBron likes you,
yeah. Well, in Splitter's case, his team getting worse was not going to put him in a great position.
Right.
So comes back over here. Sean Hiken, shout out to Sean. He reminded me the Blazers once pursued Thiago Splitter when he was with the Spurs, gave him an offer sheet that he ultimately ended up signing back with the Spurs. But I was like, oh, it's coming full circle now. But Splitter is a guy who cut his teeth in the NBA as a player development guy his first year, and then on the bench for Kenny Atkinson and Steve Nash with the Brooklyn Nets. Two very, 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 very good basketball minds, particularly on the offensive end and making adjustments and how they see the game, which I think kind of feeds into how Splitter goes about things. And then a year in Houston under Ime Udoka. Again, Portland ties. Most of that roster, I should say not most of, a bunch of that coaching roster is made up of guys from the Portland area, guys that Ime is very familiar with. And talking to a couple guys at the Rockets, they credited Alperen Şengün's growth in the 23-24 season a lot to Thiago Splitter.
Okay.
He's been a guy that I think, number one, he's a former big man in the NBA, and so guys are going to kind of expect that. So him getting a chance to work with a young Donovan Clingan, I think is something it's very good to look at. What's unclear right now is what roles guys are going to go into. I reached out to folks with the Memphis Grizzlies and got an understanding on St. Andrews and his roles. 2 years ago when he was brought to the team, he had familiarity. He's a part of the Greg Popovich coaching tree, as is Taylor Jenkins. He worked with the Bucks, and I talked to some people with the Bucks who also had the same things to say about him. Brilliant mind, offensively talented, gifted. However, when he got brought to the Grizzlies, his first year there, he ran the offense. Last year, he ran their defense. So he's on both sides of the coin there.
Okay.
He was Taylor Jenkins' number one assistant in Memphis before being let go, and Isolo kind of a bloodless coup, as it were.
Gotcha.
When they made the decision to go down that path. But everybody I've talked to has said the same thing. Both these guys are on path to be, they think to be star kind of head coaches in the NBA in the coming cycles. This is a bit of a change for the Trailblazers. They're going for guys that are more on the ascent.
Okay.
And they're clearly looking at guys that are going to try to optimize some things, I think, offensively. Now, they lost their defensive coordinator type coach in Roy Rogers.
Right.
Nate Bjorkgren was kind of responsible last year with the Trailblazers. I think people thought that he was responsible for the architect of their offense. That was actually Chris Fleming, who was doing more of the offensive game planning side of things. Now, all the coaches are all a part of it, but like Roy was your defensive guy, Fleming was your offensive guy. And I don't think it's a secret that they needed to get a little more creative on the offensive side of things. So you bring in two young up and coming performers on the coaching circuits that can maybe inject a little bit of life into you offensively while keeping a lot of your defensive principles and kind of what you're going to see going forward. What's going to be interesting is who's going to run the offense, who's going to run the defense. Like, is this going to be a St. Andrews offense or kind of like which one of these guys is kind of front of the bench? Is Splitter going to be back of the bench? For those that don't know, usually the guys in the front of the bench, those are your lead assistants. The guys in the back of the bench are your player development guys and things kind of that are a little less forward facing.
Right.
What's unclear right now what roles those guys will have. Now, I would imagine that St. Andrews is going to be a guy that's going to be front of the bench. He was Taylor Jenkins' number one assistant. He's kind of got a little bit of the star, but all of the praise that I got from Splitter, I could see a very real world where both those guys are on the front of the bench and your lead assistants become Splitter, Bjorkgren, St. Andrews.
Okay.
I could see that happening pretty clearly. I think the Blazers are probably going to hire one more coach, and they'll probably have that in place here in the coming weeks because they want to have that done before they get to the NBA draft so everybody kind of has their input and how things.
Right.
Now, ultimately, it falls in the front office, but you want to make sure things line up and make sense.
Yeah.
What's unclear right now is who's going to coach the G League team because Sergei Oliva, the assistant general manager, coached the G League team last year. I think they're probably promote from within. I think that you're probably looking at a guy like Jonah Hurskew, which might leave an opening on the bench, which is why they might look somewhere else.
Right.
But you're starting to see the staff come together. They also last week they hired Quentin Crawford, who was the head coach of the Kings G League team.
Okay.
And I reached out to some folks with the Kings. They all said the same thing. Like he's very bright, but his ability to generate relationships with players is very good. And that was also something I was told about Splitter. In regards to Isolo in Paris, they said Isolo's probably a better X's and O's guy, not as good on the personnel like people side. Where Splitter's reviews there were rave. Like everybody's like. Somebody sent me a clip of like a quote of him saying, sometimes I just want to hug a player. Like he's not a screamer, he's not a yeller, which very much falls in line with Chauncey Billups. Like, don't be wrong, Chauncey can be stern and he will give it to you straight.
Right.
Doesn't really raise his voice. Like that's not really who he is, which is kind of funny considering he comes from a team coached by Larry Brown, who chewed them up, spit them out, and left them on the pavement.
Real red ass.
Yeah. But it's very interesting. Both these coaching hires, actually all three of these coaching hires, from what I've been able to gather, these are promising. I think they're heading down the right path here. And this is from the time Chauncey was hired until now, Mark Tyndale is the only guy that's left from the original staff, and he's on the player development side. So it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of all comes together and shakes out. But I like these hires, which. It's always hard to know exactly what is going to happen and where they're going to go with things and what their responsibilities are going to be. It's a lot of guessing, even during the season.
Yes.
Like that's kind of closely guarded type stuff. But I think these hirings are all promising. Like that's the thing that I like out of this.
Well, good. So you said you expect probably one more hire.
Yep.
Now, with these guys that they've just recently hired, kind of being young up-and-comers, do we think maybe you'll have a little bit more of a veteran presence? Maybe somebody that has, like, head coaching experience?
Well, they've got Bjorkgren, who did only have the one rough year in Indiana. If you're talking about experience, like, St. Andrews has been a number one assistant, and he hasn't been a head coach at the NBA level. I wonder if they go get that guy, but I think Chauncey now with 4 years under his belt, you kind of wonder, like, it's actually kind of crazy. Like when you look around the NBA, Rick Carlisle at 7 years or 6 years is like the sixth longest tenured head coach.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't. I mean, Carlisle replaced Bjorkgren.
Yeah.
Like,
okay, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, and you start looking at how quick and how fast teams are turning over coaches. Like, I wonder if the Blazers and Chauncey feel like maybe they don't necessarily need to have
that kind of
that
veteran
guy
presence.
because Chauncey's got. You can say what you want about Chauncey, but he has the respect of that locker room. Those guys play hard for him. We know, and I know you have your objections, but like the things that you questioned, I think they're addressing. And as far as like offensive ingenuity, and as far as the buy-in and the care and how they want to develop, I think they got guys that make sense for that. So they certainly could go get a veteran head coach. I don't know necessarily if they have to at this point because their staff is a bit more experienced than it has been in the past, and I think they're heading down the right path.